Hello, everyone. Steve Anderson here with Workamper News, and I am so glad you are here with us this afternoon. We are here with Right from the Horse's Mouth, another edition of this program. We've started doing this just for fun, and now we've found that people are getting such great value from these that they're wanting to know what's happening next that's coming out of that horse's mouth the next time around. So this is about, I think, the third, maybe the fourth one that we've done in a row. And today it's going to be about propane. And I hope you love the title, More Than Just a Pretty Flame. So joining me today and our professor that's going to be sharing with us about propane is Terry Cooper, the Texas RV professor, best known as Cooper. How are you today, Cooper?
It's hot. That's all I can say. So down the road when somebody's playing this and there's 6 foot of snow on the ground, just remember it gets hot sometimes, and it has been very warm down here in Athens, Texas. Let me tell you.
It's kind of interesting too. So we're going to talk about a flame and propane on a day when it's hot. But hey, it has to work no matter what the temperature, right? So,
That's
so the
exactly right.
more we know about it, the better. Well, Mr. Cooper is going to jump into this topic with you folks. And as we get to the tail end, if you got some questions, I want you to type those in and send those to us. We will address those as we get to the tail end of the presentation. And I hope you have some questions. We'll be glad to answer those. And let's just rock and roll, Mr. Cooper. And I'm going to back out of the picture and let you have full screen.
Sounds good, sir. Well, let's lay some foundation. Let's, like any great house that's built, any commercial property that's ever been developed, they've always had a good foundation. And one of the things that we need to realize in this RV experience is the 80-20 rule. 80% of the things that are going to go wrong, or the problems that we're going to have with these RVs, are going to be easy to access and easy to fix. So when I say access, I mean easy to find it. I mean, how easy is it to open a circuit breaker panel box and turn the switch on and reset that switch back to off to on, so that way make things go again. But that's really what we see over and over again. 80% of the things that go wrong with these RVs are easy to access and easy to fix if somebody will just show you how. And so I will tell you, the National RV Training Academy and Workamper News, this has become what we do. We have learned what our mission in life is to help others succeed, because if we help you succeed, then that makes us successful. Now, also, we need to kind of, now that we're jumping into this propane thing, let's just lay a foundation. Let's get some terminology, and I'm going to call it RVNEs, okay? Now, we're going to hear terms tossed around called BTU. It's called a British Thermal Unit. Those of you who had basic chemistry and maybe even physical science, you probably talked about what a BTU was. It's basically taking 1 pound of water, injecting one degree of temperature into that water. We have now created 1 BTU of heat. So when you start looking at water heaters and furnaces, that's how they rate them. So if you happen to have a furnace there and it says it's a 40,000 BTU furnace, what they're saying, for every hour that furnace operates, it's injecting 40,000 BTUs of temperature into the atmosphere as that thing's going. Well, it's the same thing with water heaters. When you think about it, most water heaters are somewhere around about 12 to 15,000 BTUs to heat that water. So what we're doing is we're injecting 15,000 BTU, or that sounds crazy, but 15,000 degrees in an hour into that water heater. Okay, so BTU is the term we're after. So where does this propane come from? This stuff that we use, the stuff that we take for granted. Now, I've had a lot of people tell me, said, "Oh, propane scares me." And I said, "Well, do you fill up your vehicle? Are you one of those individuals that gets out and fills up, puts gasoline or diesel?" "Oh yeah, that doesn't bother me at all." I said, it's the same thing with propane. If you know how to handle it and you know how it functions, then you can be safe, just like filling up your fuel tank in your automobile. Well, propane comes from natural gas or from crude that has been refined, and all basically in the process where they're trying to strip it and get, the diesel for the engines of the big trucks that we see running up down the highway, or the crude oil that we're using, or the oil that we use in the cruise ships, and then aviation fuel, paint thinner, and then we start getting into the vapors. And so those vapors that we're dealing with will fall into what we call the LP family of gases. LP stands for liquefied petroleum. Now, LP has its brothers and sisters that are all combined. We've got propane, butane, methane, and there's a host of others that are all in that category. And all of that comes from when they strip that propane, they strip that LP out of that petroleum. So when that crude oil comes out of the ground, they measure it, they can check the viscosity, they can tell you all kinds of things, how much they're going to be able to get out of it into the gasolines and the aviation fuels and the diesel, and how much vapor they're going to get out of it, propane, butane, and methane. Okay. Now, when you have the propane that we deal with, when they first process it, it has no odor and it has no color. So what they have to do is they have to add, and I'm going to call it the stink. The odorant is added to it, and that odorant is called ethyl mercaptan. So when a lot of times people say, "Oh, I smell propane," they're not smelling propane. What they're really smelling is the ethyl mercaptan. Same thing with natural gas, and then methane. When they start using it as a fuel, it will have a little odor added to it, and the reason being is so that way it will protect us, so we can say, "Hey, I smell something. Something's not right." Now, this propane that we purchase it as a liquid and we consume it as a vapor. Now, hear this again. We purchase it as a liquid and we consume it as a vapor. Now, what happens is propane has a very low boiling point. Now, water boils at 212 degrees, right? So we can take a gallon of water, pour it in a pot, and begin to start heating it up. And when that temperature of that water gets to be 212, it begins to start changing its state, going from a liquid to a vapor. Now, if you take propane, it goes from a liquid and it starts boiling at minus 44 degrees. Minus 44 degrees will start to cause it to change its state from a liquid to a vapor. So what happens is when this propane begins to start making its change from a liquid to a vapor, it will expand 270 times. So from the amount of volume that you had as a liquid to the volume that you have as a vapor, it will expand 270 times. And it's for that reason on these propane containers that we have, whether it is the one that you hook onto a fifth wheel or a travel trailer, or the big ASME tanks that you put in the motorhomes, they only fill those up to 80%. So why would they only fill it up with 80% of liquid and leave us a 20% capacity for vapor? It's for the expansion, right? And so what happens is that when they go to fill this up, they know that they've got to have room for the expand. Now, keep this in mind if you're one of those individuals that buys propane from one of the exchange companies. In other words, you go out to Walmart or one of the gas stations and they've got that white cage out there, and you bring a tank in, you bring a propane container in, and you swap it out and they give you another one. In most applications, those folks only fill their containers up to 60 to typically no more than 70%. Now, why would they only fill it up to 60 to 70% instead of the normal 80 that we can do if you're filling it up at your own station? Like here at the Texan RV Park, we have our own propane station, so we actually will fill people up. But of course, we could fill them up to 80%, but at the exchange, 60 to 70. And the reason why those exchange companies only go 60 to 70% is because those cylinders are sitting out in the hot sun. It's up against a building, so they got that heat reflecting off that building, and they know that they've got to have more expansion capability. Now, these service valves do have a blow-by. In other words, if that tank happens to be in a really, really warm area where maybe there's a fire around the outside of it, at about 350 to 360 degrees, that pressure relief valve will blow and it'll just shoot a flame out. And so what it's doing, it's relieving its pressure, okay? Now, let's go back and look at some of the characteristics. We know that water weighs about 8.3 pounds per gallon, right? Somewhere around in there. Propane, a gallon of it is 4.2. And when you look at it, you think, okay, that's odd. But now think what happens, and I'm sure you've seen this before, when we have a lot of rain and a lot of rivers and creeks start overflowing, you'll drive by a lot of these farmers and they will have big old cables or chains tied onto their big propane tanks out there at their, their farms, and maybe at the chicken house or maybe the dairy area that they use for is propane as a heat. What they'll do is they'll chain that propane tank, because all that water coming through will pick up that steel tank with that lighter propane in it, cause that tank to float. And if you go back and you look at history of what happened with New Orleans when Katrina was hit, when Katrina hit New Orleans, she came in, she perched herself right there at the end of the Mississippi River and caused the Mississippi to stop flowing. So what it did is it caused all that water that was coming from north headed down to the Gulf of Mexico. It had no place to go. So what it did is it went out into those fields and began to start flooding those farms and places. And so when Katrina moved on, all of a sudden now all that water begins to start rushing again. It comes out of those fields, and they found that they were taking propane tanks out into the Gulf of Mexico. So they were out there bobbing around. And that's the reason why it took them so long to be able to get ships into the harbor to help the people in New Orleans. It's because they had all those big old propane tanks out there floating around. So they had to get the military out there to get them out, get them taken, put them to the land. So you never really think about that, but those propane tanks were out there floating around because they weighed less inside the tank than they did outside. Now, if water weighs that and propane as a liquid weighs the 4.2, when it makes its conversion to a vapor, it's heavier than air. It's heavier than atmosphere. And it's for that reason that we are required to put a propane regulator, I'm sorry, let me say this again, put a propane detector within 12 inches off the floor. Because we know what happens is that if we have a propane leak, that propane will be hovering along the floor, and what it'll do is it'll be sitting there. And by having that LP detector down close like that, it will pick up on that and say, wait a minute, I'm smelling something, I'm sensing it, and it'll go into alarm. Now, let's take a look at some things, and this is for those of us that maybe do RVing even in the wintertime when it's cool. So we know that one of the law of thermodynamics that we deal with is that as we increase temperature on a container, a sealed container, it also raises the pressure. If we raise the pressure on a container, we raise the temperature. Now, we use that law of thermodynamics when we start looking at air conditioners and refrigerators. It's the same thing here with us. If you change the temperature, you change the pressure in the tank. So what happens is that we're dealing with issues as the temperature goes up, the pressure inside that container goes up. And it's for that reason, like we said before, 80% is maximum that we can fill these containers for the RVs, because we need that other 20% for the expansion that we're going to need. Now, some things have changed with the propane containers. The first one is what we call the cylinders. Now, you'll hear people call them bottles and tanks, but really the true name is all the propane containers, whether it's the DOT cylinders, or those of you that are in Canada, you have a TC cylinder. It used to be until right about 24 months ago, that DOT cylinders, these are the white containers that we would find on travel trailers and fifth wheels, they had a reinspection that was required of them, and it used to be 12 years. It has now changed about 24 months ago to 10 years after its manufacture. And there is a date code stamped on the collar of these containers. It will be a 2-digit month and 2-digit year. So let's say you go into a station, say you go into an RV store and you buy a propane container, it's brand new, and you look at it, and it says it's 06-19. So basically what they're saying is it was manufactured in the 6th month of 2019. And then what will happen is after that 10 years, so if it had been a 19, so it would be due to have its first inspection at what? 29, 06-29. You'll go in and take it into a facility that will do the inspection on it. Some of them are more of a visual. Others of them, they say, no, we want to be much more. We want to do like these scuba tanks, or the tanks, the air tanks that the first responders, the firemen use, and we want to put in a hydrostatic test. But whatever your state requires, it has to have its first inspection 10 years after its manufacture, and then it's 5 years later. Now, Canada's a little different. Even though these containers are many times sold both in the United States and Canada, the regulations of the Canadian government versus what's here in the United States is a little different. So we have to make sure we abide by whatever location where we are. So 10 and 5. Now this 10 and 5 becomes a really big issue for those of you that are into retro RVs. Say you bought an RV that's an older unit and you're going to do a restoration and you want it to be according to period. You want to use the propane tanks that came with it. And so that way we want to make sure everything's picture perfect. Well, you're going to take it in, they're going to look at it and say, okay, you need to get it inspected. So you have it inspected and they give it back to you. Guess what? Your next inspection is going to come due in 5 years if you're here in the United States, okay? So just keep all this in mind. Now, you're going to run into some situations that, you know, you'll have the Canadians that'll come down here with their tanks. Well, guess what? If they're here in the United States, they have to abide by what our laws are here as well. So if they come in with a container that's due after 10 years, they've got to have it inspected as well. Now, this used to be a big deal when it was 12 here in the United States. We had a lot of Canadians would come down here with a tank that was, say, like 11 years old. So it was out of date in Canada, but it wasn't here in the United States. But when they made the changes to 10 and 5, it put us a little bit more in alignment with the Canadian government and those guys up there. Now, we also have the other side, the other kind of tank. It's called an ASME. It stands for American Society of Mechanical Engineers. It's a tank that's bolted on. It actually becomes a part of the motorized vehicle. You know, the DOT cylinders, they're removable. The Department of Transportation containers, they come in 20-pound, 30-pound, and 40-pound, and they are removable. The ASME tank, the motorhome tanks, they are bolted to the frame. They're bolted to the unit to where it cannot be taken loose. And so they have a little bit different stringent controls over that thing. And everything is based upon the volume that's filled in it, still 80%. But here's the crazy thing. ASME tanks are not required in the United States to be inspected. Other than the person who's going to be filling them up is going to put an eyeball on it. If it looks like to them it's a little dangerous, a lot of rust, or maybe it looks like somebody hit it with a curb, you know, they can say, I'm not comfortable in filling it. And folks, if they're saying that, then it's that for a reason. But I will tell you that with the ASME tanks, those units are totally different. They're made different, thicker steel, so they do not require them to have an inspection like you do with the DOT we were just looking at a while ago, okay? I want to share something with you in terms of the cold weather, because this is a big deal for us. And I've had people come into shops where I was working, or I'd be going to maybe do a mobile service call, and they said, man, it just got so cold last night. Something's wrong with our furnace. Please, you got to get it going. And you go over there and you find out the propane containers are low, or maybe they're empty. Well, the furnace, if it's not getting the fuel, it's not going to do its job. Now let's look at this example right here. You have a 20-pounder. Now, a 20-pounder is typically about the same size that you would use on a barbecue grill. Okay, travel trailers typically will come with what we call a 30-pounder, and you can do an option, an upgrade to a 40-pounder, but typically 30s and 40s are what you're going to see in the fifth wheels. And of course, the 20-pounder is, as I said, barbecue. Now, if you had a 20-pound cylinder and it's only filled to 50%, at 20 degrees outside temperature, it's only going to convert from a liquid to a vapor about 32,400 BTU. Now, what do we know about BTU? 1 pound of water, 1 degree Fahrenheit, right? Well, what if you happen to have a furnace your furnace is rated for 30,000 BTU? Can you run it? Sure can. But what happens when it starts getting colder than that evening? Say, like, let's say really late, say 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock. All of a sudden the temperature drops. Now we have less temperature coming in to that steel container and converting that liquid to a vapor. So what does that do to our conversion ratio? The colder the temperature, we have less heat to convert that liquid to a vapor. Gives us what? About 16,000, a little over 16,000 BTU. Will that furnace run? No, it will start and it'll sputter, go out, spark, sputter, just doesn't. And so what happens is as it gets colder and colder, that furnace will see less and less propane coming at it because that LP container is not able to convert the liquid to a vapor because there's not enough heat going into that container to make the conversion from a liquid to a vapor. And so what would happen many times, these people would come in on Monday morning and they'd say it's having problems. We'd go out there and pull that propane container off that vehicle, put it on the scales. And of course, here in the state of Texas, we have to weigh our propane. We'd fill it back up to 80%, put it back on there, and voila, everything's working good. So we've got to write a ticket. Now, had they known, or had that individual known what to look for, they might have said, you know, before we go to the panic and go down here and see if we can't beg somebody to take us into the service center, let's check our propane and make sure we have plenty of propane in our containers, and so we can convert the propane we need for heating. Could have saved themselves a service call, could have saved themselves a trip into the service center. Okay, so these are the kind of things I want to make sure that when we walk away today, you have some things to look at. And I always tell everybody, look at the easy things first. Today, prime example, today, before we came online, I got a phone call from the Texan office, the Texan RV park, and they said, you know, Mr. Cooper, I don't have any technicians. Can you go over and take a look at this RV? We have some units here that we rent out. And they said they're having to take cold showers. So I roll up there and I said, you know, I don't have any heat, you know, no hot water. Reach over there and flip the switch, the propane switch to the on position, and in just a few minutes they have hot water. But you know what? Those simple things is what really throws us for a loop sometimes. So anytime that we can pick up information like today or in classes, seminars that you get in, that just means you can become more self-sufficient and you can take care of yourself. So whether there's enough propane in the container could have a big issue, or maybe just turning on the water heater switch might be a big issue. And so little things like that can save us a ton of grief and a lot of frustration in our life. Could, you know, because I've had people basically said, you know, our vacation's over, it's shot, we just can't do this. And you go over there and just turn on the circuit breaker to turn on the air conditioner and everything's good. But they were in a tailspin. We call that a purple monkey. Those of you who come to class, we'll tell you what purple monkeys are, give you some examples. All right, let's move on. So here we are looking at the propane containers. Now, I want you to look at this valve in the bottom left-hand picture. See that coarse valve that's there? That's called an overflow protection. It's called an ASME Type 1 service valve. And if you see the green knob over here in the right-hand corner, the green knob is for RVs. Black knobs are for barbecue grills. Green knobs are RVs. Red knobs are for industrial use where you're running cutting torches. Now, if you take a barbecue grill hose and knob that is black and try to put it on an RV, you may not be able to operate everything in that RV. The furnace, the water heater, the cooktops, and things like that, anything that needs gas, because the black knob doesn't have the ability to allow enough gas to pass through to go on to the regulator to do its job. So keep this in mind. We must have at least a green knob on the RV, on the container, the Type 1, ASME Type 1 threads, okay? Now, on that green knob, I want to show you one other thing that'll kind of trip you up a little bit, okay? There's a thing we call the excess flow valve. Now, I want you to look at this cutaway, and if you start from the bottom and look your way up, if you look, you see where it screws in, then you see that white little washer. That is a thermal washer. Now, that thermal washer is there so that way if there's a fire around the outside of the propane tank, what it will do is it will cause that washer to melt and cause that little stinger right there, that little point on the very end at the very top, to shift back. Now, I want to slip back a slide. I want us to look at something on this container. Now, if you look at this bottom right-hand picture that we're looking at here, you kind of have a silhouette of the knob and the valve. This stinger screws into that service valve of that container, and it's basically a check valve, so that way it will push, that little stinger will push that check valve back, so that way it lets gas out of the tank. And the reason why they went with that is so that way, if there's a fire, what it will do is cause that thermal washer to melt and allow that stinger, that little brass stinger, that little, see, it's got the little point on it. It allows it to come back. And when it does, it closes off the check valve inside the service valve of the container, which basically is like somebody turning off the knob. So it's there for safety. But the other thing that we want to be aware of, because this will catch you if you're not really watching. See that little ball bearing? See the white washer, and then right above it is that little ball bearing. That's what we call an excess flow valve. And all it is kind of shuttle valve. And so if it's in its centermost position, it allows the maximum of gas flow across it. But what happens is that if we had, let's say, an RV, and when somebody had left their gas on, heaven forbid, they're running down the highway, and all of a sudden the RV is involved in an accident that flips the RV over, and some gas lines are torn, what will happen is there is an imbalance in that gas line because it's all of a sudden got sudden flow of gas just rushing out the line. It will cause that ball bearing, that excess flow valve, to trigger, and it won't shut down the complete flow, but it'll throttle it back so much that it won't allow appliances to operate. But the reason why they have it is for the first responder. So that way, when they come up on site, they smell something, said, oh, I smell propane. Well, it's not so much of a propane to where they have a great chance of blowing things up. It's enough to let people smell it and know it's there. Now, how this affects us is this excess flow valve is that when we go to set up camp someplace, what happens many times is people inside the RV will start turning on appliances before the person on the outside turns on the propane container and allows the gas to fill up the line. So when you turn on that propane container, that service valve, and it goes through the excess flow valve and in the gas line, down the lines to all these appliances, what does that furnace, that refrigerator, that cooktop, and the water heater, when they're turned on, what does that look like to that excess flow valve when you all of a sudden turn the valve on the tank? It looks like a break in the line, doesn't it? So what happens is you and I get tripped up on this. If the person inside the RV is turning on appliances before the person on the outside is turning on the propane, it gets us all out of whack and the excess flow valve trips. So if that happens, the way to reset it is to have everything go back inside the coach and let's reboot the system. In other words, turn off all the appliances, turn all the gas appliances off, then go outside and turn off the service valves on the containers, whether it's DOT or the ASME that's in the motorhome. Turn it off. And what you're going to do is you're going to hear a little metal click, and that excess flow valve, that little ball bearing, is going to reset itself. And usually that happens within about 30 to 45 seconds. It doesn't take long at all. And then after it clicks, making sure everything is still turned off on the inside, then what you do is then you turn on the propane, and then you start allowing that gas to flow into the gas line. Then you start turning on the appliances. And so what happens is gas pressure builds up and it comes through, rushing through the line, and then it's sitting there, and the back pressure will take that excess flow valve and suspend it in midpoint position. But I've actually made service calls, and all I had to do was turn off the propane at the service center, at the service tank, and go inside and turn off all the appliances. Wait about 30 to 45 seconds, leaving everything off on the inside, go back outside, turn on the service tank, and you hear a little click, and you know what it's doing. It's resetting itself. And then you can go inside and load it up. And then, and here's the terrible thing, is you go in, you got your notepad, and you got your bill and everything, and you write it up, and you slide it across the table, and you ask, well, how would you like to take care of this? Would that be check, cash, or credit card? And you know, it's a shame. You were maybe there, maybe 15 minutes, and most of that time was talking to the customer. So save yourself a service call. Save yourself from having to go into a service center and just turn everything off and give it a chance to reset, kind of like rebooting a computer, okay? So my goal today is to give you some tidbits, some things that just cut down the pressure and the tension in our lives, because we're into this lifestyle because we want to enjoy it and enjoy what it's here for. And anytime we can know how things work, we can take care of those 80% of the things that go wrong, right? Now, the next thing that we're going to deal with, because remember, you got your propane container, you got your green knob, and now you're going to have your regulator. Now, a regulator is just nothing more than just your right foot on the throttle of your vehicle. Did you know that your right foot is a regulator? So every time that you're sitting there at the red light and you see the light turn green, what do you instinctively do? You rock your foot forward and the tips of your toes probably push on the gas pedal, right? Well, that's the same thing as a regulator is going to do. Now, this regulator is going to do three things for us. It's going to adjust its flow, just like we do with our right foot, but it's also going to take that tank pressure. Because remember we were looking at what the pressure would be on the outside in the hot summertime. So here in the state of Texas, I can just tell you, if we've got a 100-degree temperature, there's probably a pretty good chance the pressure inside those propane containers is going to be somewhere around about 200 to 225, 250 degrees. I'm sorry, 225 to 250 PSI inside that container. Well, this regulator's got to take that pressure coming out of that container and it's got to drop it down to a pressure that's approved for the appliances that are in the RVs. Now, let me show you what I'm talking about. We're going to come back to this slide here in just a minute. Every regulator that's for an RV is what we call a dual stage. In other words, it has two stages. It has two divisions that it has to go through. So that propane comes in from the left, goes into first stage, and it's going to knock its pressure down from whatever it is coming out of the propane container. Let's just pull a number and say it's 200 PSI. This first tank, this first regulator, this first stage of this regulator is going to take it at 200 PSI and it's going to knock it down to 10 PSI. And then from the first stage to the second stage, it's going to knock it down some more. So from 10 PSI, it's going to drop it down to 11 inches of water column. 11 inches of water column is the exact same pressure as 0.6 PSI. So it's not even 1 PSI. So what comes out on the output is 11 inches of water column. So what goes in is, say, maybe 200 PSI, and what comes out is 11 inches of water column. Now, if we happen to have a regulator that is a single stage regulator, let me back up, a single stage regulator, like the kind that you find on a barbecue grill, it's only got one stage for that propane to go through. What's it going to knock its pressure down to? 10 PSI. So if we're using a barbecue regulator on an RV appliance, what's going to happen is we're trying to shove 10, probably more than 10 times the amount of pressure that that appliance was designed for. And so what's going to happen is that you try to light the furnace, it's going to sound like it's exploding. I have actually made service calls because a guy called me at 2 o'clock in the morning because he said my furnace is exploding every time it comes on. Well, we went out there and it was cold. Snow was basically about almost knee deep. And all it was is he had put a barbecue regulator on his propane tank. He had one of those big ones brought in, so it's like a 200-pound, and he put that barbecue regulator on that tank and tried to feed it into his motorhome. And all kinds of wild things were happening. So just keep in mind, a barbecue regulator is a single stage regulator, so it only knocks the pressure down to 10 PSI. RV style is a dual stage regulator, and it's going to continue to knock it down to 11 inches of water column, which is equivalent to what? 0.6 PSI. Now, when you're talking to technicians, just use the term 11 inches of water column. That's all they know. You and I know what really 11 inches of water column amounts to is 0.6. And reason being, the reason why they use these two different scales is it's kind of like, you know, if you're measuring something, you know, a piece of wood and you're going to cut it, you take your Stanley measuring tape and you measure in inches or maybe half inches or whatever. But if you're going to be working on an engine of an automobile or one of the diesel engines, you don't use that Stanley measuring tape to figure the things out as far as say, okay, I need to bore this. I've got a little bit of wear on the inside of this cylinder. And so I'm going to put some oversized rings in here, but I need to hone out that hole, and I need to take about 30 thousandths of an inch. You can't measure 30 thousandths of an inch with that Stanley measuring tape. So what you have to do is have another device called a micrometer or calipers that measure at that closer, tighter fitting. And so that's what we're dealing with here. Water column is tighter than the PSI. And that's important to us because when you go to, say, if you're going to be an inspector or even a technician, you're going to have a thing called a manometer, and we're going to be measuring for gas pressure to make sure that we have the right pressure feeding these appliances. Too much is bad, not enough, and they won't work. Now, I want you to also notice on this regulator, there is see where on the far right-hand side, directly below where it says atmospheric pressure, there is a drip lip vent. And basically that vent, and I'm going to back up to another slide so you can see it again. This vent is supposed to be on the bottom. In other words, what we're after is that we want this vent to be pointed in such a way that where moisture cannot get in. Because if this vent is turned upward, water will run in. And what I want you to notice right here, you see where the red arrow says atmospheric pressure, and that little black thing, that's called the diaphragm. The diaphragm flexes and moves based upon the pressure that's coming at it. So let's just say we take this RV down the coast. This diaphragm will adjust for the atmospheric pressure coming in through that vent. Now, if you go to the mountains in Colorado where the air is lighter and thinner, that diaphragm has to flex and move so that way it can make and expand to give us the same amount of pressure at 11 inches of water column in Colorado that it does down at the sea level. So it's critical to us that we don't get anything on top of that diaphragm that would cause it to freeze and not allow it to flex and move. So these regulators, I'm going to go back another slide again, so I want us to talk about it because this is very, very important. I'm amazed how many times people will change out a regulator, and because they don't know about that vent, then all of a sudden they got this thing tipped up and they've got the potential running moisture. So a little rain, a little condensation, a little dew in the air will settle on it. This vent must be turned at least at a 45, but it is best if it's turned it straight down at 90-degree angle. Okay, so all these different things going on, if you just know about them, you can save yourself a lot of heartache. Imagine if you're in a situation where all of a sudden now you can't get the propane to work and somebody has installed this thing upside down, and now you got water has come inside that diaphragm and the diaphragm's not flexing and moving, and you're over here pulling your hair out when all it was poor installation, and because somebody didn't understand what they were doing and how it was going to impact them. So tank pressure coming in, first stage 10 psi. From first stage to second stage, we're going to drop it down from 10 psi to 11 inches of water column, which is equivalent to what? 0.6 psi. So based on where you are, doesn't matter where it's at sea level or up in the mountains, that diaphragm is flexing and moving and handling what needs to be done. It also flexes and moves based upon what appliances you have turned on. So, if you've just got a water heater on, the diaphragm's not going to need to flex that much. But by golly, when you start hooking up the cooktop and running the furnace, that diaphragm's got to open up and let more volume pass through. And that's what that diaphragm's doing for us. Critical, critical. Now, typically these diaphragms do have a life on them, and it amazes me they're not stamped with a born date. But typically you'll see it's somewhere in around 5 to 7 years, those diaphragms, it's the plastic, I shouldn't say the plastic, the rubber of that diaphragm begins to start getting brittle and starts leaking. So if you start smelling gas coming out of that vent, it's coming through a crack in that diaphragm, because you should never smell propane, folks. Never smell propane, because that means there's a leak. And anytime there's a leak, there's potential for problems of something happening. All right, let's take a look at the little safety devices that we've got installed. The primary thing that we have is called the LP detectors. Okay, and remember now we've got to have these mounted within about 12 inches of the floor. Some of these detectors also, particularly those on the motorhomes, they not only sound off an alarm, but they also shut the valve. Many of the motorhomes, it's typically on your higher end motorhomes, they will turn off the propane as well. So you see in that bottom left-hand picture, that's a service valve, and it's tied up into that regulator directly above it. I'm not regulator, I'm sorry, that detector that's directly up above the picture of that detector, If that detector goes into alarm, it's going to alert us with noise, but it's also going to turn off the propane valve to shut the flow out of the container. Now, there's a lot of folks, all they have is the one that makes the audible noise. There are only 3 things that will make an RV LP detector to go off. Only 3. Now, keep this in mind. You can go down to the big box stores and you can buy an LP detector. But unfortunately, the construction of those LP detectors is not robust enough to handle the road vibration. And so the house type LP detectors do not hold up in the RVs. We had at one of our conferences for the National RV Inspectors Association, we had a gentleman who worked for one of the companies that came in that manufactures the LP detectors. And he told us, he said, folks, we make both brands. And he said, those that you see in the big box stores are made for homes, but you absolutely have to have one that's listed and registered for RVs, because the circuit boards are more robust, the solder joints in there, and they hold up to the pounding of driving down the highway. Now, LP detectors have a life on them and they are marked. Typically, they're marked on the back. I'm seeing some new ones coming out. They're beginning to put them on the front side. So that way you can see the date that they were put into service, and they're good for 5 to 7 years. The manufacturer is the one that determines. There's one brand out there that will go 7 years, but by far, most of them are only good for 5 years. Now, here's a crazy thing. I have been kind of watching what's some of the reports that some of the inspectors will send us and show us what's going on. It is totally amazing to me how many people will take and cut the power wires to these LP detectors. I mean, just, when the inspector comes in and starts doing inspection, they're required by the codes, the standards of practice that they work by is they inspect to make sure the date. Well, when they pull the regulator, the whole thing comes out of the wall because somebody has just cut the wire, because somebody woke up in the middle of the night and the thing was going off and they just got tired of it. They couldn't smell anything, so they just cut the wires and stuck it back on the wall. It's like throwing away the 9-volt battery out of a smoke detector, right? I mean, you have just voided all protection that you ever hoped for. But there's only 3 things will make an LP detector to sound off. 1, it smells something. It says, hey, alert, alert, we have a problem. 2, if something's gone wrong with that LP detector, sometimes we have situations to where their life doesn't last as long as you think. Maybe they were mishandled or something took place. And the 3rd thing that will make them go off is they lose their power. Did you ever have a smoke detector in your bedroom and the 9-volt batteries begin to go bad, and all of a sudden it would chirp at you and you think, okay, that's the last time it's going to do that, right? Well, here in about 15 or 20 minutes, it goes off again. Well, that's what's happening here. Is if they lose their voltage, they start chirping. Now they make a little bit different sound, but that's what happens. Okay. So when you look at these LP detectors, look at them from the standpoint of they're trying to tell you something. Now, strangely enough, there's different things that will set these things off. Not only the LP, but there's some other things. And it's usually the aerosol sprays. And we're seeing a lot of folks that are using this aerosol spray for carpet cleaner. Well, the propellant that they're using in these carpet cleaners is butane. Well, guess what? It's part of the LP family, right? So that that butane is spewing out there, projecting all of that carpet cleaner. That LP detector picks up on it and it says, hey, wait a minute, something's going on here, and it goes into alarm. So the aerosol spray, we don't use as much PAM spray as we used to, but I mean, I remember that was a big thing, that a lot of times if you spray your skillets with it and you're using it, and the same thing, the propellant that's used in PAM has got a butane thing to it. Now, I'm also noticing a lot of folks that are buying bottled water. A lot of the plastic wrappers that holds these packets together, or this bottled water, if you have it down by that LP detector, it will cook it off. It will set it off. Now, strangely enough, and I'm not picking on this particular company, I'm just saying it just happened to us a couple of times, and I finally figured out what it was. We went into Walmart and we bought some of that great value water because we didn't have a filtration system, a good filtration system on the RVs that we had at that time, and we hadn't brought a Berkeley yet. you know, a little on the counter water filter thing. And we had put those 2 bags of, I think they were 24 count of water, and something about the wrapper cooked off on those and set off those alarms. We have an old weenie dog. His name is Mo. Mo is 17 years old. So he's been around a long time. In doggy years, he's been here a while. If Lady E changes his diet, in other words, because we order a lot of stuff off of Amazon, and when we were staying at parks, we made sure he had the same food all the time. If she changes his food, that poor little old dog, he just has a little bit of distress, and he creates a little bit of methane gas. Well, guess what sets off the LP detector? And we learned the hard way that we had to move Mo's bed away from the LP detector over there by the center island that was in the kitchen, move it away from there. Otherwise, he would set that thing off. Now, you laugh, but I'm telling you, we learned this the hard way about that old dog. Now, we're not going to put him down because he's part of the family, but he, has this uniqueness about him, okay? So with that being said, we need to remember about propane. It's safe to use as long as you're making sure that your LP detector is intact, is fully functional, and it's 5 to 7 years. It's got the date on the back. We need to make sure that we check our regulators. I'm seeing a lot of folks that are buying used RVs, and so, folks, these regulators, are less than $100. And put you a new one on there, because if you've got a leak, you'll blow through $100 worth of propane real quick. And so there's no sense in it. And like I tell everybody, if you're changing the regulator, go ahead and change the hoses, because if the diaphragm in the regulator's old and cracked, more than likely the hoses are cracked as well, because they're typically installed and built into this unit at the same time. Now, I would be amiss if I didn't say, folks, there's more. There's so much more. If you really want to learn how to educate yourself, learn how things work, be able to help others, you just need to learn how. And so if you'll come to the National RV Training Academy, we do so much more. What I've given you here is just a small slice of what we cover in our week 1 class of our RV maintenance. Now, here's a tidbit, here's a freebie for you. Those of you that are looking about buying RVs, whether new or used, hold up your right hand and see where we got the finger pointing. That finger is your most important tool in doing your walkthrough. When you're doing your walkthrough with the technicians, whether it's at a dealership or service center, or maybe you're buying it from somebody else, buying a used one, and they say, well, let me show you how this works, and they start going through it, stop them and say, let me do that. Because every time that we take our finger and we engage it, we run the button to run the slides in and out, we turn on the lights, turn off lights, we remember better. We remember longer if we got more things involved. Hearing it, seeing it, but when you go to touch it, you enhance your retainability of the material that they're passing you, okay? And then, like I said, come spend some time with us. We have different ways, and this is one of the reasons why we teamed up with Workamper News many years ago. I was teaching at a college in Waco, and Mr. Anderson, and I were talking, and we found out we were getting the same kind of phone calls. People needed to know how their unit worked. And then, like Mr. Anderson began to share with them, said, folks, I know we're showing you about the lifestyle, where you can find jobs and where you can travel across the country and do things and really enjoy the experience. But like he said over and over again, you really, really need to have a business. There's so many more tax benefits by starting a small business. And so we're not talking about businesses that you have to have a ton of cash to do, because many times, guys and ladies, you can do a mobile inspection business, or you can do an RV maintenance business, and you specialize in certain areas. I've got some folks that say, I'm mobile tech and all I do is maintenance. I just maintain things. And I've got other guys that say, hey, I really, really enjoy working on slide outs, or I really enjoy working on furnaces and water heaters or air conditioners. And that's kind of their specialty. And then we have a lot of folks that actually have their own inspection business. Did you know you can get a home inspection on an RV just like you do your house? Except this inspection will have a whole lot more material to it. Typical inspection report, 50 to 75 pages, And so, you know, it's a way to get started and way to make money on the road. Now we've got a 15,000 square foot training facility in Athens, Texas. What you're seeing here is one of the classrooms. We've got 3 big classrooms. And you see in the picture here on the right where we've got RVs that we bring in. And trust me, when it rains, it's nice to be inside. When it's hot, it's nice to be inside. When it's cold outside, it's sure nice to be inside. Right now, I wish I'd loaded a picture I could have shown you that we're setting up for a class that will begin on Monday, because we were reopening the school. We've been doing everything hybrid, but what we're doing now is we're reopening for live, and we're going to be out in this service bay. We had to pull these RVs out, and we've got tables and chairs set up. We're going to be doing this, you know, social distancing, people wearing their mask and everything, but we're going on because in the state of Texas, and I know it's in other states the same way, RV technicians and RV inspectors are classified as essential. And so I've been tasked by the Texas RV Association to please train as many technicians as you can. We need techs badly, and that's what they're telling us at the dealerships. They don't have enough techs to deliver the units that are being sold today. Now, what you're seeing here in this photo is the RV inspection class. This is week 2 is what they're doing. And if you'll notice, see in the center picture, there's a catwalk where everybody can stand up, and Howard is up on the roof showing some things to them. But he also has his GoPro camera, and look at the picture on the right-hand side. What he's doing is he's projecting a picture up to that screen, that television screen, so they can see up close what's going on. I mean, there's no way that we could get all these people up on the roof so the instructor can get up, demonstrate to them, so that way when they're doing their mock inspections, which they have to do 2 in order to get their to pass that course and get their credentials as a level 2 RV inspector, you know, he wants to show them how to do it, and so that way when they're doing their mock inspections, they know what needs to be done and how to get it done. Here's a, okay, you can see another, we pulled the trailers out, and now what we've done is we brought in these frames. Leopard Industries sent us these frames. So right now, the National RV Training Academy is one of 2 places in the United States that you can go and get Leopard training hands-on. One is at their factory, and one is in Athens, Texas, outside of Dallas. And so what you're looking at here is units that these guys are learning on. You can see the hydraulic leveling systems, the electric leveling systems, slide outs, all those things that Leopard does. Now, if you come and spend time with us in the first week, the RV maintenance week, and I want to make sure I don't want to miss this. A lot of people don't realize that sometimes we get this information, and then if we don't use it, we kind of forget it. But a lot of people don't understand that what we've done is we've also established where if you come and take this class with us, the RV maintenance class, which is our very first class, this is the foundation for everybody, whether you're a consumer, a technician, or inspector, you all take the same class. Well, you can come back within 1 year and repeat that class for free. Now, what I have found is that by giving you a chance to come back and take that class for free, you will sit in this classroom and you'll realize how much more you know than you realize. And you'll also realize that the person next to you is struggling. Maybe they're not quite getting it. Well, you can kind of be like that big brother and big sister and help them. And that's what I ask you to do. If you when you get ready to come and do your repeat, I'm going to ask you to bring your books and the tools that you had and be prepared to kind of help the individuals that are in the classroom, coach them, because sometimes somebody else saying it a different way helps everybody understand it better. So you have that opportunity. But let's just say, for instance, your schedule doesn't allow you to come and spend a week with us here in Athens, or say if you want to spend all 5 weeks and become a mobile technician, or spend the 2 weeks and become the inspector. But you say, you know what, I've got to get my hands on this stuff. Well, there is a way. We call it our home study option. We have it either on this thumb drive, that as you see right here with all the books, we mail it out to you. It's $397. Well, it's got everything that we do in the class. We've actually recorded all of the classes, put it on the thumb drive. When you order it, you get the books, the thumb drive, a bunch of other information, and you also get a coupon for $300. Now, that coupon can be used on any other technical class. So air conditioners, refrigerators, furnaces, and water heaters. So you spend $397, you get the RV maintenance, just like what everybody else is getting in class, get a coupon, come to class. Why would we put a coupon in there? Because I want you to come and take the other classes. Because what I have found is the more knowledge you have, the more confidence you have, and the more you'll be able to help others around you as well. Whether you're running a mobile service or they're just somebody that's traveling with you, or maybe somebody you meet in an RV park, you're going to be able to help others. And if you can do that, everybody wins on that situation. So take a look. This might be the option if you can't take off for time, or you can't, you're still in lockdown wherever you are. There's still an option. So we have it on thumb drive, but also if you've got good internet and you want to start right away, we can give you internet access to the same course, same material, and give you that opportunity. So whether you do it live or you do it on, at the home version, doesn't matter, same material. These are our instructors that we use. I am a firm believer that I want them to have their credentials, but I need them most of all to have field experience. You see this gentleman here in the center, kind of has the maroon colored shirt. His name is Leon Booth. He's the thin guy in the group. Yep. We take him out to eat with us and he still doesn't get fat. I don't know what his story is, but anyway, Leon runs a mobile service business out in West Texas. Leon comes in and teaches the air conditioner, the refrigerator, furnaces, and water heaters. And the reason why we need him here is, like I told him, I said, Leon, you're like the other instructors. You have all this knowledge and you don't even realize what you see on a daily basis that's never even in a textbook. And what I need you to do is to be able to take the textbook theory and deliver it, but I also want you to give them your field experience. Now, the gentleman to the left, wearing the green shirt, he's our generator guy. We call him Generator Guru. Craig Johnson, I'm totally amazed what this guy knows about small engines and generators. So our generator class. Todd Henson wearing the black shirt. Todd's a master certified tech. He handles the push right now for the RV maintenance, the #1 course, but he also is our solar guy. Now the couple, the young lady that's there, that's Pam. Pam is Howard Jarvis's wife. They work together as a team. They do the advanced training for the inspectors. Howard came through the ranks. We met him in a class in Georgia, and I'm trying to remember how many years ago that was, but this guy, he totally gets it. There's no telling how many inspections that this couple has done. Hundreds of inspections. And then of course yours truly on the far right hand side. But this is the team. This is the teaching team. Of course, we got all kinds of people behind us that you'll talk to. You'll talk to my wife, Lady E, and you'll talk to Karen. And now we have Tony on board with us. We have all these other individuals that are supporting. And this whole thing has been built so that way we can support you guys, the technicians, or the wannabe technicians, or the wannabe inspectors, or someone who just wants to know more knowledge. So my whole point is, folks, the more you know, the more confident you'll be in yourself. So if you're looking, you want to be a part of what we're doing, go to the nrvta.com. Now that's the website. If you've got questions, just key in that info@nrvta or give us a call and we'll help you out. What you're seeing here are some classes, and you can see Leon there next to, I'm trying to remember what her name, Mel, I think her name is. They're wearing the green blouse. And so the beautiful thing about it is it's not just theory, but it's hands-on, because that's where we remember it. Remember, just like pointing our finger, this is how we remember things, is because we're putting our hands on it and we're learning how to use it. Because when you leave here, you need to be able to do the tasks that you said you signed up for. If you want to be a technician, you need to know how to work on air conditioners, troubleshoot them. Refrigerators, troubleshoot them, replace them, repair them. Furnaces, water heaters, same thing. Or if you want to become an inspector, you need to be able to go out there and do inspections on travel trailers, fifth wheels, and motorhomes. And it's all because of you learn how to do this with RVs. You say, well, I don't have an RV. That's okay. A lot of times, some of the better students are those that don't have an RV, and so they're digging in. And I've gotten notes back from them saying, well, I've decided which RV I want to buy now. Now I know what I'm looking for. And so come on, come be a part of what we're doing here, because there's opportunities for everyone, but you just need to apply yourself. Mr. Anderson?
Well, awesome job, Mr. Cooper. Awesome job. And we've got some folks been stirring up the questions here, so hold
Uh-oh.
on, buckle your seatbelt, Mr. Cooper.
Okay.
And I will also put the call out again to all of those folks that are with us today. This is a great opportunity to ask Mr. Cooper some questions about this. If anything is jumping out at you, go right to the little tool right there on your screen and type that question in. It'll pop up on my screen and we'll address those. All right, so let's jump right in. Joe and I were having quite a conversation during the process. He actually had a 2005 Tiffin bus inspected before he purchased it. And first of all right, Joe, that is phenomenal. That is the right way to go about it. And he did reach out and found a National RV Inspectors Association, an NRVIA certified inspector down in the Houston area. And
Excellent.
they were not able to do a propane leak test. And what I would like you to do, I've kind of explained a little bit here. And let me just tell you what his report said. The report stated that the LP leak system test was not possible because the test must be performed at stovetop, and due to the style and limitations of the stovetop present in the coach, testing was not possible. So if you'd like to address a little bit about that, I know there's lots of different derivations that take place, all the different types of equipment and so on. And the inspector did tell Joe that he needed to find a certified individual who was LP rated to go about doing the test differently.
Okay. In the state of Texas, and it's in the same way in some other states, people are not permitted to open the gas lines unless you have gotten a certification from here in the state of Texas, we call it the Railroad Commission, who oversees propane. So what happened, the way that, and I'd be willing to bet you dollars to donuts, that cooktop could not be disassembled where we could get to one of the burners to where we could put the hose on. Because if you were to go, how do I say this? If you were to go outside, let's say go to the water heater or the furnace and open that gas line, you have just now voided you've just now voided, and actually it's criminal in the state of Texas to open that gas line unless you have those credentials. Now, if you as the consumer had done it, and I guess they don't care if you blow yourself up, but long and short of it is that because that inspector could not take that burner assembly loose to get to that burner and be able to put his test device on it, he was limited. Now, we've got some individuals, they're finding that, hey, you know what, if I can find a barbecue grill hookup, you know, how they couple up, look like one of those air hose chucks, they've got little adapters now they can plug in, and so therefore they can do their check from there. But what he was hung with is he could not get in to be able to check that gas line. So what he did was he told you it needs to be looked at by certified. So what he's saying is you've got to have somebody that has the certification from the state of Texas to be able to go in there and open that gas line, put a test valve, put a T in there, what they call a test T, and then hook your manometer up to it. I'm sorry, but Florida's the same way, Texas is this way, and I'm trying to think of some other states that are very stringent about, no, you're not going to open it and disrupt the integrity of that gas line.
All right, this kind of ties into that. Cynthia is asking, is there any way to measure for that PSI, and do appliances have their PSI limits printed on them like the volts and watts are printed?
Okay, read that question again. I want to make sure I'm understanding.
All right, is there any way to measure for that PSI, and do appliances have, so what I guess she's asking is for the PSI that's coming into the appliance, and do appliances have on them the limits printed just like they do the volts and the watts are printed?
There will be a label on that appliance, cooktop, furnace, water heater, that will say what the pressures are that it's capable, and it will say 11. Usually it's between 9 to 12 inches, or 9 to 12 inches of water column is the range that thing will operate. It will also tell you how many BTU it's rated for. So on some of these units, there's also a service valve, a port that you can unscrew with an Allen wrench. But here again, you've got to have that certification from the state of Texas to be able to open that valve up and to see what pressure is coming into it. Usually what happens is that we are able to go into that cooktop, or maybe, like I said, outside where it chucks up to that barbecue grill, and we're able to measure our pressure and see what that regulator's doing. The reason being is, and there's a whole procedure they have. I mean, they're measuring pressure and then they bleed down. And that's one of the things that you learn here in class, because there are certain things that regulator will do, and you've got to learn how to compensate for what it's trying to tell you and what it's trying to operate for. But yes, the appliances do have all the characteristics that tell you. And here's the thing about it. These appliances, if they came from the factory, these appliances were approved by NFPA and then also the RV industry that it meets the requirements. It can handle the gases, it can handle the pressures, but also handle the road vibration and activity. And so if you go and you put a house type cooktop in there, it's not made to handle it. And so it's not certified to be in that appliance.
All right, well, Cynthia is saying, awesome, thank you. And then she's got a question mark, and she's wondering, is the name of the tool a manometer?
Right on the money. Have you been in class yet?
At least I
So,
didn't call it a manometer like I did years ago, Mr. Cooper.
well, it is spelled that way, isn't it? So
Sure is.
no, so it's Cynthia's right on the money. It is called a manometer. If you were going to go onto Amazon, look for it, they list it as a gas pressure tester. And if you're going to buy one for class, you're going to need to get one that goes from 0 to 30 inches of water column, because they sell two types, 0 to 30 and 0 to 15 inches of water column. Well, the 0 to 15 doesn't get you where you need to be. So it doesn't cost you more. Get the one that goes from 0 to 30. So Cynthia, sound like to me you've got a good handle on things. You need to come hang out with us a while, and I look forward to meeting you. Anybody's got these kind of questions, this is good, girl. This is good.
Good job, Cynthia. All right, Michael's asking the question, how do we tell when the propane dealers are doing the installation of propane correctly? I've seen several different ways of doing so.
Now, you're saying dealer, are we talking about the manufacturers when they're installing the propane containers?
No, I think he's talking about when people are filling his tanks.
Oh, okay. Well, it depends on the state of where this thing is being filled. Here in the state of Texas, we are required to put it on a set of scales, and we fill by weight. Other states do it differently, so you have to kind of know which way they're going on that. I'll tell you, I'm a big proponent, though, is I like to know how much gas is going into my tanks. Some of you probably have stayed at RV parks, and so they say, well, if you have a 20-pounder filled, no matter how much it is, it's going to be this, a 30-pounder's this, and 40-pounder. And we've had times where we knew a cold snap was coming, and I took it down there, and I could tell it had quite a bit left in it, and they charged me the same amount as if it was empty. So that's always been a rub for me. So that's why here at the Texan, we make sure that we give them a printed ticket, said, okay, you had 5 gallons entered, and here you are. But so much of what's going on out there, and I'm like you, I've looked at some of the folks that are filling it up. As a matter of fact, I had a young lady one time at one of the truck stops. I just stopped her. I said, ma'am, why don't you let me do this? Because we're fixing to get blown up. And I could tell, she said, well, I've been to class, but I don't know how to do this. They didn't show me. And I just thought, man, so
That's scary.
it is scary. And you spotted something that's there. It's sometimes out there, you look at it and you just think, how in the world are we keeping from killing ourselves because we're doing it improperly?
All right, David asks, he's asking for some confirmation for the color of the knobs. Was it black for RV, green for barbecue?
It's black for barbecue because it's the smallest. And so most of your barbecue grills are not going to be using very much BTU. Then green is for RV because it's higher capacity. And then red is for the industrial because that's for cutting torches. And so they're shoving a lot of propane through there. So black barbecue, green RV. Green for go.
Green for go. So green for the RV. Okay. All right. Don says, great presentation, very informative. Had a little problem with the sound. I'll just tell Don, this is being recorded, Don. A lot of times it depends on your bandwidth, etc. From what I've had through the entire presentation, we've had good quality sound. So the recording, you can watch it again, and maybe that sound will be a little better for you. So sorry you had some issues there. All right, Charles says, how long, again, and how frequent do you have the intro course? And, oh, hang on a second. I got more questions popping in and it jumped away from me. How long and how frequent do you have the intro course, and how far away is the nearest RV site for students?
Well, the Texan RV Park was bought specifically to have a campground. The RV park was bought specifically so that way we could build the training facility on the ground. So people walk to class. And so, that was part of what because that's the problem we've run into over and over again. We've shared the story where, we got to places that they said, oh, well, we've got a classroom for you, but we don't have enough RV sites for you. So it's kind of hard to train if you don't have your people there with you. And the classes come around about every 8 weeks, the RV maintenance class. I will say that some of the things we have learned through this COVID-19 is that a lot of folks are taking the hybrid classes. And so we're going to be doing 2 more classes. Now, this happens to be year 2020. We'll be doing 2 more hybrid classes, doing this class to where you will be Zooming. You'll be doing like we're doing here. And then you'll also have a top opportunity to come and spend live with us as well. And then in 2021, we are scheduled to do a class every 8 weeks. We'll be doing the RV maintenance class every 8 weeks.
All right. All right. Ray has known of us and been familiar with us now for a few years. He says he purchased your course on thumb drive about 2 years ago. Love it and still using it. Has much changed in the program since my purchase, and should I upgrade?
Ray, there's been a few changes, and the big change that we saw was, when you bought that thumb drive, the reinspection date for the DOT cylinders was 12 years. It's now changed to 10. We've added a lot more things, and so what's happening is the people that come and do the live classes with us are getting quite a bit more, a lot more Q&A, spend a lot more time working on your volt-ohm meter so you learn how to use electrical. Those of you that are, if you have to take the hybrid class where you have to be at home and then eventually come and spend time with us, we do a lot of that same thing. We just found that we had to have something for people to be able to start with, because a lot of people, they've got some good technical backgrounds, and they can take off if you can kind of help them, give them a little boost and give them some technology and give them some RVNs so they can understand, so we can all call things the same thing. So to answer your question, there have been a few changes, not as much as you would think, but propane still boils at minus 44 degrees as it did 2 years ago. So it's, that part hasn't changed. The big thing is that there's a few changes to some of the appliances and things like that.
That's awesome that he's had 2 good years of knowledge and education out of that, Ray. So good going. Glad to hear that. All right, let's see. We have Daryl asking this. He says, when I was in West Texas, the temperatures were in the teens. He was at a truck stop, and they said it was against the law to fill when it was that cold. Is that true?
Well, that's the first I've ever heard that. Interesting. It was against the law to fill when it was that cold. Huh. Well, propane boils at minus 44. I hope it wasn't that cold.
It gets cold in West Texas, but I don't know about that cold.
That's interesting. Do you think somebody just didn't want to go outside and fill propane?
It sure sounds like it to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Huh. Yeah.
Oh, well,
I've never heard that one before.
All right. Daryl, you just gave Mr. Cooper some new material for class. So there you go. Thank you. So I guess the answer is no. They should have been able to fill your tank, Daryl. All right. Cynthia is back asking another question here. She says, I missed the very beginning, and is there a good place to get a horizontal loading propane tank?
So I'd be kind of curious as to what kind of RV she's got that would need a horizontal.
All right, that's usually more of a motorhome style. Can
Hmm.
you give us some input, Cynthia? I'll go on to the next question here. And back to Daryl's his situation about where they wouldn't fill his tank. He says that's probably the case. They didn't want to go out in the cold. All right, David says, can the LP tanks rust from the inside?
Daryl, they won't, because see, what would cause them to rust would be moisture. And if you get moisture in that propane, it actually, at that temperature, it will freeze and block the orifices, and it won't allow that gas to flow. So as long as propane's in there, they're not going to rust on the inside. And we've got some that we have cut open for people to see, and you can see in the manufacturing process that steel is not painted on the inside of that tank. They weld them suckers up, and then they paint it on the outside, and so it's raw steel on the inside, and it doesn't rust because there's no air in there. And if there was air, then that would have a chance for it to freeze because there would be moisture in that air.
Mhm. All right. Cynthia got back to us and says she has I like this, an elderly 1986 Toyota Dolphin.
Ah, okay. Yes, they do make a horizontal DOT cylinder that, and matter of fact, you see a lot of them in those Dolphins, and you also see a lot of them in the slide-in campers, because what they do is they try to wedge those things in between the camper and say the fender well. And so some of them just don't have the room to put a DOT cylinder that's up in the vertical position. So they sell one that's in a horizontal position. And basically, it's the valve system that on the inside of the tank gives you that ability to do that. Yes, they do sell those. You know, let me just say this. If you can't find one on the market, reach out to us. We've got some connections with several suppliers. Should be the same suppliers that your RV dealers have got, because we buy parts from the same place they do. We can order some of those, because I ordered one specifically, and Mr. Anderson, don't shoot me for this, but I bought a brand new tank and then went out there with a Sawzall and cut it open so people could see what it looked like.
Got to have those teaching tools, that's for sure.
Yeah, we call those the petting zoo, folks. Anything, stuff like that, we call that the petting zoo.
Well, Cynthia's came back and says, you have already convinced me that I need to replace the tank, hoses, the regulator, the whole shebang. So thank you very much.
I tell you what, come spend time with us here in class, and we'll hook you up, okay? We'll help you. And we won't do the swap out of the regulators and hoses for you, but we'll be over your shoulder coaching you, help so that way you learn how to do it yourself. So come hang out with us and we'll help you.
And Cynthia's says she's in a field in Vermont, so it'd be a little bit of a trek, but we've had people from all over the country come and be with us in Athens. Because as Mr. Cooper, what do you like to say about the roads there in Athens?
All roads lead to Athens.
All right, let's see. Here's another one. It says, I've been looking at a gas stop auto shutoff device. Do you recommend these?
I don't, I mean, they're not really required, but people have more comfort level if they have one, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, see, that's the beautiful thing about this RV experience. There's so many things and accessories we can add to these things that either one increases our creature comfort, or two increases our peace of mind. And gas stop is not a bad deal at all. Not a bad deal at all.
All right, well, you've been getting some kudos from folks that are some of our, I call them our groupies. They want to hear everything that you have to teach on, Mr. Cooper, and we're always very appreciative that they're with us. And so we got kudos coming in from them. I don't see any other new questions popping in. Oh, wait a second. They're letting me know that I'm winding down here, and they're dumping them in here. Besides the two-stage regulator, my RV has a red regulator. What is the purpose of this?
You must have a fifth wheel. And if that fifth wheel is set up, and this, as you just described it, this is the most common application, is you will have your propane container on one side and its regulator, but on the other side of the fifth wheel is a compartment that has a propane container by itself. Now, the National Fire Protection Agency has a requirement that if the propane coming out of a tank has to travel more than 60 inches, which is what, 5 feet? If it has to travel more than 60 inches, it has to have its pressure knocked down to at least 30 psi as it travels across. So what we're going to do is they're going to come out of that tank, that propane container. They're going to take it through that green knob up to that hose, and they're going to take it to that little red regulator. It's going to knock it down to as a single stage regulator, and it's going to knock it down from tank pressure to 30 psi. And then what they will do then is they will take that 30 psi and pump it across to the other side where it will join up with that other container, and then they will run it through that regulator. So what they're doing is it was put in there as a safety device. Now, they haven't always been that way, but they've had some problems where they're concerned about having, say, like 200 psi traveling into the belly of that RV over to the other side. And so if you had a lot of issue, a lot of mechanical things going on, mechanisms driving and stuff, they want to make sure they knock that pressure down before they put it in that environment. I will tell you, those little regulators are notorious about going bad. If all of a sudden you find that you're pulling propane good off the one where the regulator is, but the one where the little red regulator is just doesn't seem to work, the way we teach our technicians is just pull that container where the red regulator is and swap it with the one where the dual stage regulator is. If the regulator, let me say this again. So if you swap it, then over where the red regulator was, if it still doesn't work, then that tells you it's the regulator. Because if the tank works over on the other side, then it's nothing wrong with the tank. And the only thing you have left is the red regulator. And folks, those red regulators are like 25 bucks. So it's not even worth messing with them. People say, well, I just want to troubleshoot it. It's like, look, if it's not moving over, you got a bad regulator, put a new one in, be done with it, move on, go enjoy the RV lifestyle.
Yep, and you nailed it, Mr. Cooper. Rob came back, says, you're right, I've got a fifth wheel. All right, Michael has another question. He says, I've been told that my RV needs to be level for the refrigerator to operate properly. Is that so, and why?
Okay, so we're sure. You have to realize these RV let me say this again. These RV refrigerators have a set of coils on their back, and they have got water, ammonia, hydrogen, and sodium chromate inside those coils on the backside. If you begin to start using this RV and the RV is unlevel, what happens is that water and hydrogen and sodium chromate separate. And so what happens is the sodium chromate stays behind. So as you're heating up the boiler to shake and boil that liquid, turn it into a vapor that we're going to use to make cold inside the refrigerator box, what happens is when you're running it like that and all those components are stripped aside, what happens is that sodium chromate begins to crystallize. And then that crystallization will now start floating through those coils and start blocking some orifices up inside those tubes, inside those coils. Now, to leave it unlevel once or twice is not a big deal. It's one of those situations, it's an accumulative thing. And typically what we see is that on these RVs, if the RV is usually within just a few degrees, and I've learned that if you'll take one of those little 6-inch bullet levels and put it in the freezer compartment, just right there on the bottom of the freezer compartment, and look for the bubble. As long as that bubble has got one of those marks, or you're on the left side or the right side, in other words, that bubble is not hard to the right or hard to the left, but the bubble's still got a little bit of a mark on it, then you're usually okay. But what they're trying to do is to keep this thing from being shifted so badly that the water, the hydrogen, and sodium chromate separate. Because if it separates and you start cooking it, you will crystallize it, and it never goes back. I mean, once it's crystallized, it's crystallized. Now, they say, well, is it okay to run the refrigerator running down the highway? So I'm going to go a step further, okay? Folks, please do not run the refrigerators when you run on the highway. Don't run it with propane on. as you're going down the highway. If you have an RV style refrigerator, you can keep the doors closed and everything will be fine. Because if you're running it, let's say you have a blowout, and that old tire tread comes up there and just whacks that gas line and tears it loose, you're going to have a bigger fire than you're going to be able to put out. And you know, in our classes, I share some stories there in Waco. When I was teaching there, we had a couple come in and they had a fifth wheel, and while the guy was inside paying, their refrigerator clicked on, and when it did, it ignited fumes in that service station area, and it literally exploded out there and knocked the canopy down and blew some windows out. Nobody was killed. Some people got some glass cuts, but when it come back after the fire marshal finished, they said your refrigerator ignited and you were the ignition source that caused this. So between that kind of ignition and then also the potential of gas lines getting ripped off with, you know, blowouts, it's not worth it. So I know I'm answering more, but here was a perfect time. I just say, please don't do this. And you know, I've seen some situations. I just think, I shake my head. Only by the grace of God, somebody did get hurt.
All right, we'll make this our last question. Daryl says, I see people putting a propane hose on the mounted tank for fire pits, barbecue pits, etc. Do you recommend this?
Okay, so the RV tank, they probably have what they call one of those extend-a-stays or the extenda units. And then what it is a little brass valve that you turn the knob and so you can feed the appliances in the RV, or you turn the knob and you can feed the barbecue grill. I mean, they're made to do that, and that's what they do. It's just be careful. You know, that's the main thing. Make sure that you turn the valve off before you start taking hoses loose. But yes, yes, you can buy those, you know, at the big store, you know, Camping World, those guys, I'm sure they've got those in there, and they show you how to run your propane. So yeah, absolutely.
All right, wow. Mr. Cooper, we've had a great crowd stay with us the entire time today. Lots of wonderful questions. Any closing comments you'd like to make before we close up another session of Right from the Horse's Mouth?
Well, folks, you know, if you're looking serious, come hang out with us. We specifically built this facility to train individuals, to train technicians, to train inspectors. I was very impressed when I got a phone call the other day and somebody says, Cooper, we've been watching what you're doing. You guys are doing a great job. Please don't let up. We have such a major shortage of techs and inspectors. So come hang out with us. We'll give you the best we've got. I promise you, when you come, you'll be a tired little puppy when you come away, because you can say, wow, my brain swelled. But that's how you learn, with your hands. So come hang out with us and we'll walk you down the path.
All right. And as Mr. Cooper says, all roads lead to Athens. So get your plans made for 2021 for sure, if you can't make it towards the tail end of this year. We are really excited about seeing things start to open up again and get back into full operation as we hopefully move further and further through this pandemic agenda. Well, with that said, we will call it a wrap. Mr. Cooper, thank you very much for your knowledge and for your presentation. And this is another session of Right from the Horse's Mouth. And I like to close up by always saying, I know we're going to see all of you down the road. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye now.